Good afternoon from wherever you are watching, and welcome to the Claire at the Young Vic for Why we Demystify What's Blocking You. My name is Tonki. I work as Creative Associate here at the Young Vic, and I am joined by a panel who I will introduce in a second, but excuse me. First of all, I want to say a little bit about what this event is about, and why we are doing it in this current format. For those of you who haven't been to a YVI Demystify event before, or who are tuning in for the very first time for this online, YVI Demystify was set up at the start of this year as a strand of monthly free events for theatre makers in the widest sense of the word, the originators of new work for the stage. And it is aimed at tackling some of, as Kwame put it much more beautifully than I can, as your work is starting to take flight, you might hit some unexpected air pockets. So it is aimed at the creators of work for the stage who, as their career is taking off, find that they run into certain challenges, certain unexpected obstacles, and through our Demystify strand of events, we try and unpack ways of overcoming them. We started in January with an event about finding a path into the industry. We had an event in February about dramaturgy, and today is going to be about what's blocking you. It's an event organised in partnership with wonderful people behind ArtsMinds. The aim is to look at resilience, ways of overcoming some of the things that you might feel are blocking you or are limiting you as you are trying to create your work for the stage. Now, of course, recently circumstances have changed somewhat. Most immediately, that is noticeable by us not being able to do this as an event as we would normally do these kinds of events in front of a live audience, and in fact, therefore, live streaming it instead. Of course, we are very aware that the current situation might be one of the challenges that, as creators of work for the stage, we are currently thinking through how to overcome them. That said, at the same time, one of the core reasons for continuing with this event is to show that we are confident that at some point normality is going to return. And we hope that by an event like this, as creative practitioners, we can think through what we can do in the meantime so that when normality does return, we are in the best place to continue our work. The way, for instance, a musician might be able to practice their instrument in this time, as theatre makers, we need to think creatively what we can do now. So let me introduce who are in the room with me. To my right, Kwame Kwai, our Artistic Director of the Young Vic. To his right, Danny Rahim. Danny is an actor for both the stage and the screen. You might recognize him from, for instance, Primeval, or DCI Banks, or indeed Citizen Khan.
Research.
And Danny speaks very wonderfully and very openly, both on social media and in the flesh, about some of the pressures that, in your particular case, an actor might face in their career. Mm-hmm. And to Danny's right is Muriel McClymont, who is a life coach and personal trainer, including with FEU Training, the Federation of Entertainment Unions, and is in that capacity working with both creative practitioners, but also, I understand, journalists, writers on various resilience and survival skills in the creative industries. Kwame, can I ask you to start off with a couple of comments before we hand over to our two speakers today?
I don't have very much to say, actually, except for thank you. Thank you for joining us. It feels really important, as you've said, Tunki, at this time, that we adapt, that we pivot, that we find ways of saying today's difficulties are the difficulties that we will find ways through, under and around. But also what was really important is, and in particular for the freelance community right now, who don't have the safety net of buildings like we have, that they know that we're all thinking about them, and that this is something that we're pressed forward with, so that while we're in semi-isolation, before we go, or if we go to deep isolation, that we in the sector are continuing to think about how we can send things and interact with you. So thank you for being here, and whoever's watching, thank you for taking time on your phones, your computers, your tablets, or whatever.
Very quickly, apologies to interrupt at this stage. Just normally I would say if you see me looking at my tablet, it's not because I'm checking Facebook. However, on this occasion it is. That is just so I can see comments and questions coming in from you, the viewers, which I will be able to relay to our speakers here as the event progresses. Mm-hmm. Anyway, over to you, Danny and Muriel.
Great. Well, it's great to be here, actually. And I think one of the most important things to remember with this group is we are creative, and therefore of all the solutions and changes and flexibility that you mentioned, you're the best placed group of people to actually exercise that creativity in new avenues. And I don't know if you want to say anything before we start, but I'm actually thinking the obvious place to start in the current climate, and one of the main things that can block people is around anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Why don't we start there then?
Let's do that.
I think it's interesting to note when we first discussed putting this together or being involved in this, it was a slightly different climate and things have sort of shifted. But actually, thinking about it over the past couple of days, there are lots of consistencies that we probably would have said back then anyway. It's just, how do we adapt? And it'd be interesting to talk through some of that stuff today and see, how it may have been 2 weeks ago to perhaps how it would be now, and what needs to shift, and, how people can adapt and kind of carry on, keep calm and carry on, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Because when I was trying to prepare this morning, and I was thinking, well, what kind of things, the climate has changed. But actually all of the advice is actually just the same. Mm-hmm. It just is almost more important to access. Yeah. And I think with anxiety, we were having a chat before we started around anxiety, and we were sort of saying, don't dismiss anxiety necessarily as a bad thing. We want a certain level of anxiety so that we actually take precautions, so that we actually keep ourselves safe, so that we actually do what we need to do. It's only if we let that anxiety run away and become all we see that it becomes problematic. Yeah. And it's like, how can we find ways to redress the balance? Because similarly, not enough anxiety is not going to be good for us either.
Because we become, I guess, careless or just kind of nonchalant towards it. Yeah, I think we were also saying that with stress as well, weren't we? That stress in moderation can be positive sometimes. For an athlete, stress, a level of stress is important, and you may get better results, but it's when is the end of that stress? At the end of that race, there will be calm. And actually, if the stress or the anxiety is sustained, then long term that can have a very negative impact, including on your immune system, which at the moment is what we need to be up, and trying to be resilient.
It was interesting. Before I became, it's interesting to me. Right, everybody else goes, really? That before I became an AD, an artistic director for those who, I probably had as a writer maybe 2 openings, possibly 3 openings a year. That moment of absolute nakedness, that moment where you're putting your work in front of the world and you're saying, judge me.
Yeah.
And I felt that I had my coping mechanisms. I would always be on an opening night. I would always be the last person out of the dressing room. I'd be the last person to the party so that all of the haters could leave. I figured that everybody who stayed after an hour either really hated it and needed to tell me it, or were fans. So I had a couple of mechanisms in place to protect my emotions and my spirit, as it were. And then in my first year as an AD, I went from, as I said, possibly 2 or 3 to opening 10 or 12 plays in a year. And I'd forgotten, or I'd never thought about it before, that I'd only really thought about the actors and the writers, but that an artistic director and a producer also have their ego and their art, their curatorial art on display. Yeah. And my anxiety shot through the roof. And I didn't know, who to talk to about it. Like I hadn't yet made or found my group of artistic director friends that I could a community that I could say, hey, do you also feel that? So that's point number 1. What is your community to share your anxiety with? As I think you've said, anxiety by itself is not a bad thing. It's about when it takes control and when you can't contextualize it. And then and it took me maybe 2 years as an artistic director to understand or create internal mechanisms to deal with being naked 12 times a year in front of people that you fancy, saying, please like me back. So I think that was a really brilliant point about how we manage stress and anxiety, not just at this time, but throughout our careers.
Can I just say, I hope to those of you who are watching the live stream that the sound quality has now improved. I am seeing the comments coming in.
What was it that they couldn't hear us?
Yes, so rather unsettling, 2 microphones. Thank you very much, Sander, that's brilliant. Hopefully you can all hear well now. I think we should probably also remember that there is an audience on the other side, so let's try and project and enunciate this.
My acting days are gone, bro. I don't do projection.
Great, okie dokie. We were talking earlier before the event started about something that I've identified as I think a recurring thing when as theatre makers we talk about our work is we can very quickly fall into the habit of defining ourselves by what we do rather than who we are. And I think especially on the current circumstances where what we do might be somewhat compromised for a while, it is hard, for instance, for a director currently to get a group of people together in a rehearsal room. What can we do to help our thinking and build that internal mental resilience to think of ourselves as something else than what we make?
I had it was 2012, 2013, so I graduated from drama school 2008, came out, was quite fortunate, got my agent, did a few little bit, did a play at the Tricycle. Did you come and see The Great Game?
I did.
Yeah.
You were wonderful in it.
Get out, he doesn't remember who I was.
Because it's all right.
I'm joking. So the story was that things were going well for quite some time, and then in 2012, had a series of unfortunate events. My dad wasn't particularly well. I had come back off a show and broke my foot, or the side of my foot, which meant I lost another job with the BBC. And so I had this like 3 or 4 things that just came and I had envisioned my trajectory was going to go like this, and it just came and absolutely battered me. So very quickly came this moment of self-reflect. Who am I? What am I going to sit here and be sad about all these things? And I had to really quickly choose to not let that kind of stuff and that uncertainty overwhelm me. How quick's the foot going to get better? Is that going to mean that I don't go back to this job? Or there was so much uncertainty, kind of how we're sitting now actually. But I used that time to really focus, and I know it can seem a bit of a funny thing to say, but to focus on myself and who do I want to be? How do I want to exist in this world? What's important to me? What are my values? And what that meant is that when I did eventually recover and come out of all of this kind of phase, I knew what kind of work I wanted to do, who I wanted to work with. I really used this time to kind of identify who I was and what the path that I wanted to hopefully pursue was going to be. And that clarity was invaluable, but I only know that now because I'm after it all and I can see that. And sometimes, some of our we may not know what that future is going to be, but I'm saying as an example that really, really helped me. Just having that little bit of time to kind of find oneself. And we can all do that at the moment. This is a perfect opportunity. We were talking earlier, weren't we, about in our otherwise busy lives, we've now got this moment where we can be calm and relaxed and reflective, and people have wanted that for so long, and now we've sort of got it with a sort of risk element attached to it and a bit of uncertainty, fair, but it is a sustained amount of time that we can have for ourselves and kind of ask these questions and decide what we want to do or where we'd like to be or who we'd want to be. And I think we should really capitalise on that at the moment,
Yeah, I mean, it's also really important to remember that we're not what we do. It's like there's so much more to each and every one of us. I mean, we have families, we have lives away from work, we have hobbies, we have all these different parts of our life. Our work is just one section. But if all you focus on is that one section and there's a problem there, then you kind of sort of affect every other area, and you
It
can
becomes
sort of plummet.
all-consuming, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah, and I call you 1 trillion% right. I have to say, I have not been very good at that in my life, right? I remember a time in particular where I used to be an actor, and I even hate saying that, but I used to be, but because again, so much of my identity was bound up in being an actor, and I used to work well, up and down the theatres, up and down the country, and then there came a moment when the work stopped. And part of it was engineered by myself, part of it was just not. Part of it was I wanted to move from only working in the regions to working in London.
Yeah.
Then there was another time when I went, I want to stop just working in theatre, and I want to also move into television.
Yeah.
And each time I did that, it probably meant that I was out of work for about 6 months as I turned down lots of other stuff and then made that transition. But I remember going through a period when I wasn't working, and I just got depressed.
Yeah.
And I got depressed, and then I was so used to people phoning me and saying, "What are you doing?" Question number 1. And I'll go, "Hey, I'm doing da 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 da," and I've just had this one, and blah, blah, blah. And actually, the idea of people calling me and having nothing to say, I just stopped speaking to people. I mean, like they'd ring. I mean, it was back in the day, and people would ring. I'd just put the phone down, or I'd let it go to answer machine, or I wouldn't speak to people because I could only define myself through the art that we make, and I think it's really hard to separate yourself from your art, because as a friend of mine said once, a director, he said, the artist is God's Christmas present to herself. and our ego is kind of, or mine was kind of slightly bound up in I'm doing God's work. I'm doing the right, I'm here doing the right kind of work that says the right kind of thing to catalyze. And so separating that is really hard. We have to, but it's really hard.
It is really hard. And I spend my life, I work a lot with performers, and I spend my life sort of saying...
Sorry, can I just pause you for 2 seconds?
Yes.
Because we are seeing comments about the sound quality coming through that,
So
ironically, one of the biggest things blocking people at the moment appears to be
sound.
Their ability to hear us. So we are going to pause for 2 minutes. Hello, welcome back. I hope everyone can hear me better now, and I will make sure to set up my iPad in a second so that I can indeed see your comments. Also, just to flag up really briefly, there is a little bit of a delay between what we are saying here and what you are hearing at home of, I think, a minute or two or so. So do forgive us if our responses aren't immediately responsive. When we last left you, we were talking about anxiety, and we were talking about a particular example that you gave, Danny, about where you ran into some bumps in your career after a couple of very successful years, and you were just about to take over and respond to that, Muriel, when we went out. So please can I hand back over to you?
Great. Yeah, we were talking about this unhooking of identity from your performance, and that's true whether you're a writer or a musician or an actor, or whether you're working in any capacity in theatre as a creative. It's very personal, and it is you. And if you're being rejected as an actor, it's sometimes because you don't look right, and it's hard not to take that personally. But it's really important to learn that it's not, because who you are is so much bigger than any role you might play, any piece of work you might perform. And to hang everything on your identity makes everything just so vast and so important that you're living on, your very being is being questioned if you don't manage to find strategies and ways to unhook that and actually go, it's about your behaviours, it's about your ability, your capabilities, it's about the way you've presented something. And finding strategies to sort of bring it down to that level. There was a really lovely video with Sam Neill talking about Imposter Syndrome, and he was sort of saying that for years and years, he hadn't done training, And for years and years, he kept waiting for somebody to burst onto the stage and say, "Get out of here, you know nothing." I'm paraphrasing. And he said that he finally learned that acting, the way he learned to cope with it was, he said, acting is something I do, it's not who I am. And that was what made the difference to let him actually reduce his anxiety levels, because who he is way, way more than what he does, as it is for all of us.
A friend of mine, he was coming into acting, and his father was an actor. And he said, "Dad, what advice would you give me, apart from don't do it?" And he said, "Son, there are 1,000 reasons why you may not get a job. Just don't let your acting be one of them."
Lovely, yeah.
And I now use that for writing. I use it, right across the artistic sphere. It wasn't until I became an artistic director that I realized getting a new play produced was almost like an act of God.
Yeah.
There are so many variables going on. Size of cast, where you are in the season, theme of the season, what actors you can get, what play this dropped out, what audience response you've been getting, where you are economically in the cycle. There are millions of reasons, but actually your play being rejected may not be because the play is not good.
Yeah.
It may just be that the timing right here and now was not right for it. So there's 1,000 reasons why you don't get a job. Just don't let your acting be one of them.
Yeah.
And also, I take exception to the word rejection, because I have interviewed many, many people, and I have chosen people to do roles. I've never rejected a single person, ever. So when you put yourself or your work forward and somebody else is chosen, that's what's happened. So how you describe it and how you live
Very
with
good.
that has an impact on how that sits with you.
Yeah.
Actually, to continue on that, I was wondering if you, Muriel, could say a little bit more about ways we might reorient our thinking around, let's use the word rejection just as an example, or when you don't get a job.
When you're not chosen.
When you're not chosen. When you've gone into the audition, but somebody else was chosen for the role. When you've gone into the pitch meeting, but somebody else ended up directing that show. When you've gone into an interview, but you weren't chosen for that particular job. What could help reorient our thinking to deal with this?
Well, it starts in the planning. When you're actually thinking about getting ready to go for the audition and go. Don't make it the only thing on the table. Don't have a plan A and nothing else. Have a plan B, have a plan C, have a plan D, so that you've got other options to fall back on. But also, when you set yourself the goal of going to the audition, people sort of think, I've got to have a goal. I'm going to give myself the goal of, I'm going to get that job. But if you're not hiring, you can't give yourself that job. So that's a goal that's completely out with your control. Whereas if you approach the audition to say, I'm going to prepare the best I possibly can to give myself the best opportunity to get that job, then you walk in, you do the audition, you know you've done a good job, you've succeeded in your goal. Whether you get the work as well is a bonus, But if you can actually have that attitude and sort of approach things like that. And a tip from an actor friend is always arrange something nice to do after the audition, so that as soon as you come out of the audition, you've got a coffee or a visit to an art gallery or something that you're going to enjoy, so that you're not coming out going, oh, now I have to feel bad. And this whole idea of failure, it's like, failure as a word, to me, it's like sitting in a bed of concrete. It's immobile, it's fixed. Whereas if you can say, all right, well, the feedback is I wasn't right for this, or I didn't do something that was suitable for that. What can I learn? What can I learn? And then you can move forwards, onwards, upwards.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit to that.
Yeah.
Hopefully you can hear me. Rejection is redirection. Which is something that I had on a fridge a couple of weeks ago. I got a little empty quote board, and we fill it with some kind of wisdom that resonates with the household. But yeah, we see rejection, as you were saying, as this negative. Oh, they didn't want me. This reflects on me as a person. But actually, there are so many variables, as you were saying, that quite often are totally out of your control. I've met directors before, and been up for things where they've said, you will be in this film no matter what happens, don't even get a recall. Do you know what I mean? And so you just realise somewhere up that tree, it's out of probably other people's control as well. So I think it was Bryan Cranston as well. He says, he got asked, some advice, and he said, do your prep, go in, do your audition, and then forget about it, leave it. And for many years, particularly at the beginning, when I was auditioning, it was exciting, this role in this film or this film, and things that you're watching, or like Homeland or something comes up, and you're so excited to tell everyone, and people be like, what audition is that for? And you tell 20 people, then you don't get it, and then you have to tell 20 people you didn't get it. So not only are you processing it for yourself, you kind of got to go through that 20 times. You didn't go, oh, why not? What happened? And so I'd stopped telling people, actually, when I was auditioning. I would just tell them when I got something. I say, when I get something, I'll tell you. But a lot of the actor training that's happening, or the kind of more advanced stuff, and a lot of the American influence now, is not about the acting technique itself. It's about the self, and who am I, and how do I arrive in a room? Because if you have that stuff solved, and you're sure of your identity or where you want to be, you carry an energy and a confidence that kind of projects beyond what the role is. Does that make sense? And so a lot of the training now is about, how do I arrive in the room? How do I present? Am I confident? Am I happy? Am I present? Am I centered? Rather than the intricacies of how did I deliver that one line. And sometimes we can get so caught up on those little, I said this, I'd come out of auditions and I'd be going, I should have gone higher on that, I should have gone a bit harder on this. And actually, by that point, it's done. And it's how you go, okay, that moment's passed, what will be, and how do I choose then to move forwards?
I think that's right for actors, but it's right across the board in the arts, right? Yeah. One of the things, however, that I find hard, and I call you absolutely right, or that I found hard as a freelancer, and I've been in institutions now for 10 years, and that sounds, the way I phrased that sounded quite bad, but alas. But I've been leading institutions now for about 10 years, and in my mind, I probably, this is the first year that I've gone, oh, you should stop pretending that you're a freelancer. Okay. And you should actually realize that you're actually institutionalized, and that you don't have to worry about your wage coming in at the end of the month, which is a huge relief, and a huge bandwidth tax when you don't know that. And so actually, whether you are chosen or not, or we choose the word rejection or not, there are other things that are attached to whether I'm chosen for that job or my play is chosen for that job. It's linked to my economic well-being. And so actually trying to balance mental well-being while also being really cognizant of that it's all right if I don't get audition 2, 3 or 4. It's really fine if 4 theatres didn't take my play, or 3 TV companies didn't reject it. But actually, as that goes on, that then has a material effect on myself and also whoever else depends upon you for your income. So I think we absolutely have to find mental resilience, but we also, as a community, and a community is really important, we have to find ways of supporting ourselves financially through dodgy times. I would always say, as an actor, as an artist, you'd walk into an audition, or you'd walk into a rehearsal room, and you would talk about things that on Main Street people would not speak about for a month or a year, and you'd be there the day before, right? You'd be there immediately. But the one thing that I found creatives seldom spoke about was about how much they earned the year before. Yeah. Because our identity was deep, even deeper than the art that you did. It was, but how well did you do financially? And then at the top end, people don't talk about how well they do financially because they don't want to boast. So it's for me, holistically, it's about what mechanisms we use to look after ourselves, but also as a community, particularly at a time like this. How are we thinking about financially supporting each other so that when I'm actually doing on that dip, which we all have, that I know that there is a resource, that there is a safety net of some sort. Yeah.
And also, I guess, kind of removing the shame attached to it of, just creating that it's okay to say, what are you up to? What was your, and you say nothing at the moment, it's just very quiet, but I'm doing this. It comes back to what you were saying, is like your identity surpasses just that little moment. Yeah. And actually, I do think it's very important to be able to create that space for each other where it's okay to say I'm not doing anything, or it's okay to say I'm not okay at the moment, or I am struggling a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, these are really, really important.
Yes.
Would you like to?
Yeah, I mean, do you know what the point I was going to make has just flown straight out?
We can rewind.
Yeah.
Do keywords.
You got a minute and a half.
And then correct. And then hopefully that will cue it up.
Well, if I can just quickly pick up on that, then I think one of the things I keep saying to directors I teach, or actors I teach, or help with audition preparation, is it's important to remember that if you have been invited to be in the room, to be interviewed, or to audition, it is because whoever is at the other side of the table believes that you can do the job that you are being interviewed for or being auditioned for. You are there to help them solve the particular problem that they have, the role they need to fill, or the job, the show they want directed. I think what we often forget when we look at people we admire is that for every show of theirs that we see, for every role we see them play, we don't see the 9 shows they didn't get. We don't see the 9 productions that never got off the ground. We don't see the 9 auditions where they didn't land that role. And I think one of the most useful things that was said to me when I was starting out was actually by Declan Donnellan, who said the quickest way to make yourself really miserable in this job is to keep comparing yourself to others. So I was just wondering if you could maybe pick up a little bit on comparison and how we can deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to say something just on the whole community aspect of, you know, you were saying one of the things in FEU training, we work with actors, musicians and writers and journalists, and the feedback we get, because we have people new into the industry and we have people who, you know, are in their 70s, and I think we've even had someone under training in their 80s. It's the range. We've got really experienced, knowledgeable, talented people, and we've got less experienced, less knowledgeable, talented people. And it's this idea of we're not alone, and we all have these same problems or versions of these same problems. And actually, one of the biggest benefits of the workshops is realising that, you know, there's a group of us and we're in a similar boat. But I absolutely agree on this whole comparison thing, because if you look at other people in your industry and you sort of admire someone, and they've been doing the job for 20 or 30 years longer than you have, you know, in 10, 20, 30 years, you'll have that more experience. But so will they. You're never going to catch them. And every single one of us have come from a completely different background. Even within a family, siblings will have a different experience of their upbringing. So we all have this unique experience. We have a unique experience at school. We have a unique experience in our training and in our lives and in our relationships and in our work and in the jobs we've got. So what are you comparing? You know, it's like and especially as a creative, you know, what you're offering is so unique. There is only one comparison that's valid, and that's where were you 6 months ago and where are you now? So what have I learned in the last 6 months? That is a valid comparison, because people are often, as soon as it's 6 months old, you know, it's like it never happened. And I know we always recommend do an achievement file. Every time someone writes something nice about you, every time someone says something nice or sends you a positive email, get it, save it in a file or print it out, so that when you're having that bad day, you haul out this achievement file and go, oh my God, I did that. You know, remember how wonderful that was. Remember how I felt when I achieved that. I was working with somebody the other day, and they had this humongously huge, successful play. They created it, they wrote it, they had it performed in the House of Commons, and because it was done and dusted, they thought it was nothing. You know, they thought, well, that must have been easy because I achieved that. And you sort of go like, oh, you've forgotten all the wonderful stuff you did. And that's what people do. They discount that and they focus on the problems. And in a way, you know, the environment of what's happening now, where people put their attention, what people focus on, is going to make all the difference as to how difficult or more difficult they find this, you know, because it's undeniably going to be tough for a lot of people. But if you only focus on the bad stuff, you know, you lose sight of the fact that even in this horrendous situation with this virus, you know, people are doing amazing things. You know, there's a perfume company producing hand sanitizer. There's a gin company in Scotland producing hand sanitizer. And, you know, there's the pollution levels have cleared in over areas of China and Italy. You know, Italians are serenading each other, you know, across the towns. In Spain, there's somebody giving exercise classes. I mean, in Britain, I don't know whether we'll all shout sorry out the window. I'm not sure what our version's going to be. But if you only focus on the bad stuff, it takes you to a bad place. So sorry, that was a bit of a rant.
And another small thing. I watched a video a while ago. It was by a US admiral, and he says it was kind of his leaving speech he did at university. It's, if you want to change the world, start by making your bed. And the point of this is we can be at home in the morning and in a very uncertain world where we're not sure what's going on, what our next day, week, month is going to be. We set ourselves small targets, achievable targets, that we get up in the morning, we make that bed, and that is one achievement already done for the day. And if you set yourself up that every day you have a small achievement, then where are we going to be in a week or after 365 days? So there's small kind of micro wins that we can have that keep us positive, that keep us focused, that give us a sense of routine. And for me, that was another thing that was very important, is feeling like I had achieved something in a day. If we're quarantined, we're all supposed to be stuck at home, you can feel kind of like constrained, trapped. But actually, there's so much that you can be doing while you're at home, you know, to having those small wins and victories and writing that little script or speaking to your friends. And we can still be creative. We can still do those things in the confinements of our own homes, you know?
I'd like to speak a little to comparison, because I think that probably saved my mental well-being. Excuse me. And I remember... And again, one of my favorite sayings is history is a foreign land. They do things differently there. And probably it's hard to remember a time when black actors kind of had very little presence and wasn't working at our major theatres and weren't running our theatres or wasn't on television. It wasn't so long ago. But I remember when I started, you know, invariably we would leave drama school. And our white peers, whether we thought they were better than us or not, would get off to do that period drama for TV and would go off to a major theatre and play in a European classic play that we weren't necessarily allowed into. And that we as black actors would only probably get an audition for the bill or playing some like criminal to the third or, you know, third to the left. And that was really taxing on your mental health. It was like you would compare yourself to that white peer and go, why are they getting those breaks and why am I not? And very early on I realized that if I wanted to survive, I would decouple. We would say back then that white boys have careers and black boys get jobs.
What about the brown ones in the middle?
Well, I don't know about it in the middle. It's brown is all by itself as well, right? But you know, and in a kind of way, I was very determined to not compare myself to my white peers. I went, I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to judge me by me. I'm going to judge me by what work I can create, not just for myself, but what work I can create. And I swear I think that saved me. Even to this day, I don't read what the neighbour theatres, what reviews they get. I don't read the star ratings. It's not that I don't care. It's that because I care for our family. But actually, I'm not going to compare myself or my achievements to other people. I'm going to compare them to my own personal North Star and whatever that means.
Yeah, nice.
I think it's the only valid comparison. I think, who was it said, all comparisons are odious? I mean, it's like, it's the only comparison. Where were you? Where are you now? Then you can use that. That's progress. That's feedback.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I'm finding it really interestingly, again, for me, may not be for anybody else, but about 2 years ago, when I write a play, once it's been produced, I kind of forget about it, and I don't know what happened. I know that sounds crazy, but it's like I just release K from my brain, and so that I can get more space. And so I got an invite from RADA that they were producing my very first play, which was called A Bitter Herb. Now, because that play at that point was about 15 years old, I had absolutely no idea what was going to happen in it. I promise you.
Yeah.
And so I turned up, and I was really afraid, because I was just like, oh my God, I'm going to see my flaws. I thought I was a great writer. I'm going to see my young me, and it's going to be horrible. And I was really nervous. And I arrived, actually, and I was sat next to an actor friend of mine, Cobner Holbrook Smith. And as I watched the play, actually all of those anxieties went away. And I realized that the younger me was a braver, bolder, more forthright being than I had become. That all of a sudden my 26-year-old self was standing, pointing the finger back at me, saying, I'm afraid, my friend, the things that you're calling pragmatism is really compromise. Mm-hmm. The boldness that you think that you're really doing actually is quite weak in comparison to who you were when you believed that to be the truth. And it changed me. I went back to Baltimore, I resigned my job, literally the next day. I do mean the next day.
Yeah.
I saw it on a Thursday, flew in on a Friday night, and I resigned the next day.
Wow.
And then I looked at anything that I wrote from that place on through the lens of my 19-year-old self, my 27-year-old self, and my 35-year-old self. There's kind of that time when I believed wholeheartedly that I saw the world through pure eyes. No, it doesn't mean that I wasn't wrong. My 52-year-old self now looks back at my 36-year-old self and says, oh, maybe he wasn't quite right then. But actually, there was an energy and a truthfulness that can be a guide. So actually comparing yourself to yourself, for me, is a tool that allows me to negotiate my current position.
Just to pick up on that, I think a really useful thing that was said to me by James McDonald, who mentored me within the Stage Directors UK scheme, was said that often, especially for directors, because we are so busy going from job to job, and sometimes if we're fortunate enough, we can be in a position where we go from one show back to the next one. It leaves us little time to think over how a production went. Now, this is not just true for directors, but I would say for theatre makers in the widest sense of the word. I think that time to sit and to contemplate and to think, how did this go? How did this meet my expectations at the start of the project? And where am I now that it's culminated? If anything, the current circumstances hopefully gives us an opportunity to find that window, to reflect, to maybe write down that process and the outcome. I'm aware where we are time-wise that I would like to open this to comments and questions from our audience. So those of you who are watching this on the Facebook live stream, please can you type in your comments and questions to the speakers, and I will relay them, bearing in mind that there is a little bit of a time delay between what you type and it's showing up on our screen here and then showing back up on your screen. So in the meantime, as hopefully some questions start getting to us, I would like to ask you, Danny, you speak both in person and on social media about the positive and negative sides of social media, especially from a point of view of self-promotion. Now, we are currently in a place where more and more of us, given current circumstances, are using primarily social media to communicate. What advice would you give on how to use that medium right now?
The advice I would give is probably to stay true to yourself, really. I think, I've got a younger sister who's currently at university, and she was going through a particularly difficult time, but that wasn't how her life was presented on social media. So how were people ever supposed to know that she was going through a difficult time? And we tend to project all the good things that are going on in our lives, but we don't tend to kind of show our vulnerabilities, or when we're not feeling safe or we're feeling a bit insecure. And I think we've got to try as much as we can to be vulnerable and to show that fragility and say, do you know what, my life isn't totally rosy, and actually at this moment in time, things aren't going as I'd expected, but that's okay. And actually, another thing just to add to that, and it's a slight tangent, but over the past couple of weeks, I've got quite a few friends, creatives, who have become very concerned with money because what is our future? Money, like I don't know when my next 3-4 jobs have been cancelled. It's making me stressed. I'm depressed, and I just wanted to say that not to say to everyone to go on to benefits, but we have a system designed in this country that if you are before you starve, sign on and go on to job seek. There isn't a shame attached to it. You are job seekers. We are at a time of high unpredictability, and before you have that moment of you don't have enough money for food and to survive that week, sign on. There's I know loads of actors now that are very, very successful, but in their times of need they had to sign on and be job seekers.
I have.
Yeah. And
no shame.
And there is no shame attached to it. And I feel we're so scared, and we're so, so like, I don't want to be perceived as this, like, draining the system. The system is designed for those people that are self-employed, that have these. And actually, I worked on a production recently, and it was a kind of French co-production. And in France, creative, when you're working, you're getting your day rates or whatever it may be. When you are then not working for 6 months, they will support you at 50% of what you were earning before. That is a huge investment and commitment to say we appreciate the arts, and we want you to be. We want sustainability here. We don't have that same level here, but it exists to some proportion. I really want to say, there is no shame if you need to sign on, and because it's a difficult time before you starve. Sign on, get yourself back on your feet. It's not a lot of money, but it's enough to get you food for the week, and don't be ashamed of that. Yeah.
Do you have anything to add to that, Muriel?
No, but I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, just going back to what you were saying about social media and Facebook, I think it's really important to remember that most people are just presenting the good stuff. And a friend once said to me, it's like, don't judge your backstage by somebody else's front of house.
Yeah.
and I think that's what Facebook is. It's most people's front of house.
Yeah.
Again, the questions, comments field is open. So if anybody watching wants to come in with any questions or comments, please do. In the meantime, thinking more concretely about where we are now. We don't know how much longer the current situation is going to last. We might end up in a situation where we are spending more time in our homes than we would normally be doing right now. How can we make sure we don't buckle under the cabin fever?
Yeah. Do you want to?
No, you go first, and then I'll go. Yeah. Ladies first.
There's a lot of aspects that, for the start, I wouldn't call it cabin fever, because the way we talk about it influences how we feel about it. So, it's one of those weird things, again, where you focus your attention, if you sit at home wringing your hands going, this is terrible, this is awful, then you're not going to pause and actually look at some of the creative projects you could be working on. I've not met many writers who don't have a pet project in a drawer somewhere that if only I had time, I'd work on that. So here's your opportunity. I mean, I know there's serious stuff to do. You have to make enough money, you have to organise your life. I'm not trying to play down what's happening. It is very serious. But it's amazing how these little seeds are starting to form. I mean, even in my own experience, there's a workshop that was supposed to be a live workshop that we're working on delivering via Zoom with breakout rooms, and it's a kind of workshop that's very interactive. So it's going to be a real journey of exploration to sort of see if it works. But we wouldn't even be trying that if this wasn't happening. So it's trying to focus on what's possible. I mean, the big thing in my mind is, what can you do? If you sit and make a list of all the things you can't do, you're going to feel pretty rotten very quickly. So instead, make a list of the things you can do. And I think that is a shift of focus that will actually keep you more active and more involved and more positive. And for goodness sake, network. We have this amazing internet. Use it to speak to people. Use it to stay in touch. There is a Facebook group for everything, you know. And if there isn't, start one. You know, it's like you can do voice exercises. You can practice skills. You can learn new skills. You can speak to people, like-minded people. So don't just sit and look at four walls thinking this is pretty miserable. There is an element of choice. And maybe if we've got time, we'll sort of speak about some tips on actually reducing anxiety and stuff.
I think you've articulated most of the things that I was going to say. Is we want to see the opportunities, not the obstacles. You know, this morning I got a call, so I do some photographic work or, you know, some commercials or whatever, and this morning I got a call from my agent and said, we could really do with like updating your portfolio. You've got some like an amazing body of work. So now, while all the creative photographers are all off, go to them, just email them and say, do you mind if I get that photo from that shoot and that shoot and that shoot? And so I spent, you know, 2 hours of this morning just pinging out, and it was really nice because the kind of creative world came together and said, oh, how are things for you, mate? Oh, it's that job went, this happened, that happened, and it just, we do have that community there, and we don't need to feel isolated and alone. You know, everyone's in the same boat, and we're very fortunate that we have things that like FaceTime and WhatsApp calling where we can stay connected, because if this had happened 20 years ago, we wouldn't have had these luxuries and the ability to stay connected with our peers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think no matter the size of your home, for me, finding a spot that makes me feel good. It might be a chair. It might be looking out of the window in the kitchen. It might be finding that spot that is kind of your creative spot, the spot where you go, oh, I think I can clear my mind, putting your headphones on sometimes or taking them off. I find that really advantageous for my, and again, you're absolutely right, it's not about whether it's cabin fever, but those moments when you're just at home. When I was a writer, I mean, I'm still a writer, but when that was my primary occupation, my children sometimes would come home from school and I might not have left the house for 4 days because I had a deadline, or more importantly than the deadline, the fire was burning. I was writing in that black heat, and I didn't want to stop. You know, I didn't even want to have a shower. Too much information. You know, but alas, I just wanted to just keep it churning, and 4 days would go. Yeah. You know, and in a way, I don't necessarily have. I don't have a way to say how can we survive it, but how can we find that spot in your home where you go, this is my thinking space. This is the space that makes me feel relaxed. This is the place that allows me to go in or come out, as well as how I use modern technology, how I use FaceTime when I need to. And also, and again, I'm probably walking on very dodgy territory here, but until we get locked down, as it were, in our homes, and again, that probably isn't very good language, but until, you know, we can still leave the house and walk. Yeah. We can still go through the park if you have the luxury of having a park near you. We still can, you know, we still can move, and it's one of the beautiful things about sometimes living in London is just walking and looking at the architecture, just looking into people's homes and going, oh, I might have that later when I can afford it, or just looking, you know, I just think there's something about using this time, if we're not able to come into our offices or into our places of work, to actually tour the area that you live in, that invariably you don't have time to, because the only thing you know is how to get from your house to the bus stop or to the station and round. Have you walked the long way up and down? Have you zigzagged through the streets? You know, how to utilize the first world that we're living in here in Britain.
Embrace it.
And how do we embrace it? How do we capitalize on it? I think will also be quite good for certainly my mental health. My final thing, a friend of mine said this to me in LA. He said, find your loved one and walk with them.
Yeah, love
Take the time to just walk. And And I think that's really important.
Yeah. I
No,
agree.
that is lovely. And for you, it's a space in the house. For someone else, it might be a piece of music, or it might be an activity, you know, like running, or, you know, something that actually just calms you, or that actually just gets you back into yourself, so that you can then actually go back. And in the current situation, when was the last time you spoke to your neighbours? And are there any, you know, it's like in this, do you have elderly neighbours that you could actually, you know, put a note through the door saying, do you need anything? So, because actually thinking about other people is a great way to actually make yourself feel a bit better too. So.
Acts of service. Yeah, absolutely.
Before I go on to some of the questions that have come in,
Yeah.
I think as creators of work, as directors, as theatre makers, it is always about working under the conditions that you have. It's not about, well, let me put it like this. You're going to make yourself really unhappy really quickly if you keep thinking, oh, if only I had this and this and this and this, if only I had this fantastic camera to make this short film. Well, tell you what, the fantastic camera isn't going to make you make that short film.
Yeah.
You know, if only I had this massive theatre to put the show on. Well, actually, it isn't about that. It's work under the conditions that you do have access to, and the restrictions can breed the creativity, I would say.
Yeah, for
Going
sure.
to some of the questions and comments. Actually, if I can direct the first one to you, Kwame. This has come in from somebody watching the Instagram stream. I have a sibling who has real talent as a poet and performer, but is only confident to flex that ability in the confined spaces of her church. How do I get her to write and perform with more breadth? As in breadth, not breadth, breadth.
Breadth, yeah.
I don't know. Would be my first answer. My second answer would be thank you so much for being the first question in. I think we have to meet artists where they are, right? We have to encourage, and we have to give confidence, and we have to let them know that someone outside of their own sphere finds the thing that they're doing valuable. But also we have to take, you know, ultimately, it's not what others say about your art, it's what you feel about your art. It's where you feel. So in a kind of way, my only answer would be keep on encouraging, keep on saying how important that person's work is to you, and hopefully that you would have placed a seed in the mind of that artist that will allow them to think, now I'm ready to amplify. You don't necessarily always need an audience to amplify your art. Or to do your art, you need an audience to amplify it. And maybe that artist isn't ready to yet be amplified in a loud fashion. But maybe they'll get there if you keep telling them how important that work is.
And also ask them what they would like to do. We're so quick at fixing things and redirecting people, and we don't stop to actually ask the individual, what would you like to do with this? Is there anything where do you perceive yourself in a couple of years? You know, what inspires you? And put it back on them, because when people make their own discoveries, it's more sustainable because it's come from within. When we project them onto them, they don't tend to last because they're not the things or the directions or routes that they necessarily want for themselves. So always ask the question, you know, what would you like to do with this? Is there anything? Are you happy just doing what you're doing? And give the person the space, their own autonomy to make their own decisions, you know?
Yeah. Just to add, what you just said reminds me of when I was working with somebody and they had this incredible creative hobby. I can't actually remember what it was they did, but it was phenomenal. And I suggested that they use that as an additional income stream, and they went, oh, no way, that would completely contaminate that for me. I'm not interested. This is my special thing that I do for me. So yeah, that's a really good point.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So moving on to the next question. How do you think we should safeguard the mental health of casual and freelance staff in an industry that relies on them, particularly in these uncertain times? Now, I'm aware that might be a very big question and a potentially tricky one to answer, as the situation does seem to change from hour to hour almost at the moment. But looking particularly at casuals and freelancers, I would imagine that you deal a lot with people who work freelance and as casual staff.
Yeah, could you read the question again? Sorry.
Sure. How do you think we should safeguard the mental health of casual and freelance staff in an industry that relies on them, particularly in these uncertain times?
Wow, yeah, that is a huge question. I mean, that's partly the whole point of the FEU training, is like how to help people to deal with the psychological side of that, and to develop more resilience and more confidence, and also to diversify and find other ways to other income streams, so that you're not sort of dependent on one or the other. But it's a tricky thing to face, and it's like it's part of the industry. So it's something that you have to sort of learn to live with and learn to develop those sort of strengths and protections.
Absolutely. I don't think we can safeguard. What we can do is just try to contribute to a sense of mental well-being at this very turbulent moment in our history. My only contribution to that right now would be from the Arts Council down. Everybody is talking about how best to look after our freelance community and our casual staff community. It's not something that is at the bottom of our inbox, but actually right at the top. And how that will manifest itself over the next few weeks, I'm not sure, but do know that there is a great deal of thought going into looking after that fundamental element of our infrastructure.
And just to add, in the meantime, I mean, we've got to take some of this accountability back onto ourselves and think, we can't depend on an answer that may never come, or a solution that may never come. And actually, from everything that I'm reading at the moment, it's about creating these micro communities, this triangle of trust, this support network amongst ourselves. Who are the 2-3 people that you can be very honest and open with, and you can tell them how you're feeling, and you can support each other, whether that be financially, emotionally, spiritually, whatever it is. I think we don't want to project too far into waiting of, when are the government going to decide this and do that, because we might be waiting for a long time. So it's about making those kind of short-term plans in the meantime, and actually being sustainable or self-sufficient in the meantime ourselves,
Great, thank you. Next question then. The industry, brackets, and the world right now can feel very disempowering. What can you do when you feel like you have so little control? This is picking up on the points you made earlier, but particularly given that both the industry and the world can feel disempowering, what can we do to feel like we have more control?
I think that is the absolute perfect question. What can you do? Because there's so much at the moment that is completely out with all of our control, and some of the best brains in the country are trying to come up with answers and suggestions and solutions. So why waste your time and energy trying to come up with those same suggestions and solutions, because you're not in a position to implement them? But all you can do is sort of think, within my environment and in my life, what can I do? How can I take care of myself? How can I take care of the people around me? How can I be responsible and use my hand gel and make sure I protect other people and myself from this virus? What can I do? How can I nurture my creativity? How can I practice my craft? How can I develop my skills and use the time that I've suddenly got? I can use it rocking in a corner, moaning quietly, saying we're all doomed, and I've got the right accent for that, we're all doomed. Or we can go, do you know what, there is some really horrible stuff happening, and that horrible stuff is going to touch some people very personally, very hard. But on the whole, most of us are not going to get the worst brunt of it. So what can we do? What can we focus on? How can we build and develop and use our time positively?
I fundamentally believe in self-determination. When I was an actor, I got to a point where I was complaining. I was going, these people are not giving me jobs. And then I was like, okay, so let me create plays. So that not necessarily for myself, but to tell the stories that I wanted to tell. When I became a playwright, and then I got frustrated about that most of my plays were being directed by white males. I was like going, and I'm complaining, and I went, no, I need to learn to direct. And so I kind of went out, and I had privilege.
Yeah.
I was relatively earning good money, so I could. And I was networked. But I was able to go, okay, cool. I'm going to learn to direct so that I can direct. And when I was directing, I got frustrated at ADs, going, oh my God, what kind of seasons are you putting on? You should really put on. I went, do you know what? I want to become an artistic director. I want to become a gatekeeper. And so I kind of tried to make that happen. That's not about me. Aristotle talked about self-determination. Marcus Garvey spoke about self-determination. That the idea that you can use, that you do not wait on anybody else. And I'm from a political kind of school where we used to say back in the day, giving away my age, I'm not going to wait for the man. As in, I'm not going to wait for, the white infrastructure to feed me. I'm going to have to develop myself and amplify my skills and build a pathway so that I can be assisted to fulfill my potential. So I think it's really important, actually, that that's not just about this time, but any time. The moment we find ourselves in that fundamentally British thing of complaining about everything that is around us, that actually we take stock and that we say, no, be the change that you want in the world. Find another way to self-determine. And it's easy. I know I've got the privilege of male privilege. I've got the privilege of middle-class privilege. I've got the privilege of, but I didn't always have middle-class privilege. I was born into a working-class family. And I didn't always just have male privilege. Of course I did. But I also had to take the minus of being black in that world and having to negotiate that. And so I would fundamentally say, self-determine. Find the thing that is blocking you and try and occupy that land.
Can I add something to that self-determination? Because what's happening in our world and in our industry at the moment is someone has just taken the whole thing and shaken it like a snow globe. The people who can stay on it, who are prepared to self-determine, who are prepared to go, everything is not going to settle back the way it was. This is going to evolve. Life is going to be different, I believe, when we come out the other end of this. So the people who are going, how can I contribute? How can I help mould those differences? Are the people who are actually really, really going to thrive.
Yeah, I would say, just to come back to the point I said at the beginning, we hope that eventually, we might not know when, we are going to return to some form of normality. So use this time, if you can, if you want to make sure that you are in the right place to get back into the swing of things when normality returns. However, there is no need to put undue pressure on yourself right now to write, as somebody on Twitter said, write King Lear. It's totally fine to use it as a time for reflection, because that is ultimately going to be as helpful to you as writing that 4.5-hour play about a king and his daughters.
I think, sometimes in the silence we have the greatest epiphanies, right? Just sitting with yourself for a moment, you have discoveries about who you are, as we sort of spoke about earlier on, what you'd like to do. And I've sort of like moved more into kind of reading into a bit more psychology and how we work and why we work, following that 2012, incident where kind of my world sort of collapsed in a way. And so I always come back when times get testing or tough. I come back to this thing, this little mantra. I go back to my shed. And my shed is kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, but it's sleep, hydrate, exercise, and diet. And those are things you can control. We all can control. And when we feel like we're losing control of the external, the exterior, the money, the work, come back to that shed. Come back to your shed and make sure if my mood is slipping or my mind is slipping, make sure I'm sleeping properly, I stay hydrated, I exercise or go for those walks. Exercise doesn't have to be smashing it out in the gym. Just get your body moving and be sensible with what I eat or aware of what I eat. And for anybody that gets low or feels depressed or those are things we can control, and I guarantee if you're not feeling great and you come back to those kind of core fundamentals, you will feel better.
I would say also that when I returned to the country 2 years ago from the United States, that I found Britain, or England specifically, to be amid a breakdown, to be amid and being in denial actually about its mental health breakdown that was happening. And I think we found ourselves as a culture actually moving out of that denial in the last 6 months prior to this, and actually accepting that there is a profound mental health issue in our country, amongst our young, but not just confined to our young, but and the sands have shifted post the 2008 recession. The world, the way we see the world, the way that the young in our metropolises now, they can't ever see a job for life in the way that when I was growing up, they can't see the pathway of, you get in your job and you find your partner and then you buy your house and then you're able to do that. They're not seeing the world because the world has fundamentally shifted after the 2008 recession. And it's going to shift again, as you say, now, in a way that we won't be able to predict. And I think that comes back to what you were saying, Tuki, about, and actually what you're saying, what we're all saying, is that try and control the things that you can control. Because to worry about the things that you cannot will not contribute to mental well-being.
Well, that's anxiety, isn't it? I don't know where I read it, but it says if you're worrying about the past, that can be depression. If you're worrying about the future that you arguably have no control over, that's anxiety. The only way to fully exist is in the present. So you can control this moment. What do I do in this moment? And I read that somewhere and it really kind of stuck with me. What is the point of worrying about things done and things that are so far ahead that may or may not ever happen? It doesn't promote positive well-being.
Absolutely, and that's the whole point of kind of mindfulness and mindful practice, and actually, but you need to be able to go into the past, and you need to be able, you need to go into the past to learn from what worked and what didn't work, and you need to go into the future to plan and make decisions. But if you live and fret in the future, you're absolutely, that's it, that's where anxiety lives. And if you fret about what you should have, could have, that is absolutely where depression lies. But to learn how to step back from that and actually be mindful and in the moment, and if we've got time, there's a couple of strategies, and one is the obvious of breathing, because when people are feeling anxious, they take short, shallow breaths high up in their chest, and what that does is it triggers the primitive part of your brain that is used to fighting saber-toothed tigers, and it disengages the outer cortex, which is the reasoning part, the bit that goes like, is it really a tiger? Really? And even just stopping and taking 3 deep breaths, it lets that part of the brain stand down and the outer cortex engage again. And then you can actually start to function, and then you can actually start to think properly. Because while you're in that panicky mode, and there's a really good strategy, because I think every time I pick up the phone to a friend or a client or a colleague, all I'm hearing is anxiety. I mean, it's you walk around the local supermarket and people are looking at you scared. I mean, there's an environment out there, and there's a really good technique to sort of try and get, because if you can get back into your body, you have to be in the moment to do that. So there's a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique, whereas if you just pause and say, what are 5 things I can see? What are 4 things I can hear? What are 3 things I can touch? 2 things I can smell, 1 I can taste. To even just go through that, you have to be present in your body, and it's a great way. And then follow that by 3 breaths. And a number of times when I'm working with a client, when they come in that state and you just calm them, and then you bring up the issue, and they've got solutions, because the solutions aren't present when you're trying to dodge saber-toothed tigers. The solutions are present if you can breathe and be present.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to remember that. I'm going to do the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I also think this is a unique opportunity for freelancers in the arts to rule the world. And I know that sounds weird, but actually when you spoke about managing anxiety, the role of a director is in part to make sure that everybody in the room is working at their optimum. And there's a moment in week 4 of a 5-week rehearsal where the rehearsal room is nothing but anxiety, right? Including your own, right? And if you don't manage that anxiety, that means not just managing your own, but managing the anxiety of everybody around you. You won't get to fulfill the production's potential.
Yeah.
And there's also a moment where freelancers can get to rule the world. Because the overwhelming majority of us are wage slaves, right? You go to work at 9 and you clock in and you know if you're lucky enough to have employment. But actually the freelancer has had to negotiate the times when it is of a plenty and the times when it is not.
Yeah.
They have to negotiate, I'm going to be at home for 3 months, or this is the 4th month in a row that I've not really got out because I can't afford to, or I haven't been chosen for that job, or blah, blah. So actually how freelancers actually can teach the overwhelming majority of our population of how to mentally survive through that actually means that artists are possibly in one of the best positions in our society to help lead, to help make us well, to help teach us how to negotiate the travails that may be coming at us. So actually when going back to self-determination, actually setting up a business, setting up some kind of enterprise, setting up some kind of community group that actually helps to teach those in your family who are used to the regularity of that wage, who are used to the regularity of that 9 to 5, who are used to getting on that bus at 7:05 and you're not. Helping them through that is actually our duty right now. We can lead.
Kwame for Prime Minister. Yeah, that was a good speech. We need you on the TV, mate.
Well, thank you very much for that from all 3 of you. I think those were such useful insights, and thank you very much for those techniques that you can apply almost immediately there, Muriel. I would also really like to use this opportunity to direct people to the ArtsMinds website, because of course ArtsMinds was set up particularly to address some of the concerns that you just expressed on returning from America. And ArtsMinds, if you go to artsminds.co.uk, the umbrella organisation looking after mental well-being in the performing arts, umbrella organisation doing equity to stage, Spotlight and Batman. I would also say that possibly the time we're in now, there is something similar at play to what happens when you apply for something but you were not chosen. That time spent on that application for that bursary or for that directing award or for that scheme, that time spent on that is not wasted time if you do not land that.
Yeah.
Because it helped focus your thinking. It helped get your ideas in a coherent form on paper or in your mind, so that the next time you go into an interview with an artistic director, you can talk with passion about that play that you want to direct. Or you can talk about that writing project that you really want to do. And maybe this time we're in now might be a similar sort of environment where, as Muriel, you said beautifully earlier, the writers that have that passion project in the bottom of a drawer somewhere, this is a time to pull that one out. That brings us to the end of IDemystify What's Blocking You. Thank you very much to everyone who has been watching this online from wherever in the world you may be right now. I would also say that there is an audio recording of this event. We are going to release this online. Bear with us while we get it ready, as I'm sure you'll appreciate that we have quite a lot of things on our plate at the moment. But we are absolutely determined to make this available to you as soon as we can, so you can hear back the conversation that we've had today. Thank you so much to all of those who've tuned in to watch today's event, and most of all, thank you very much to Muriel, to Danny, and to Kwame for this event, and also to the people you cannot see if you're watching online: Ezekiel, Matt, Zander, and Sarah, and our producer Holly, who made this event happen today. Thank you all very, very much. We are still working out how we can move, for the time being, some of our activities into the digital sphere. Please keep following our website and our social media channels, and hopefully we will be able to inform you of potential future events if the current situation continues. Anything else you would like to add, Kwame?
Yeah, well done you.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you, T, for leading beautifully. And actually for heading up, YVID in a really dynamic way. We're here for the sector and you're making sure that we live up to that promise. Thank you, sir.
Thank you all.
well done. Thank you.